Next is Dr. Chitrithara, instituted medal for best oncology paper. And we have 3 eminent judges in our panel. Dr. Michelle Anthony from Rajagiri Hospital. She's a senior consultant and breast gynae oncosurgeon. Dr. Amrita Ramachandran from Kozhikode. And Dr. Anupama, my classmate, is from AIIMS Kochi. Over to you, and you can take over from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Raju.
Anupama,
so, yeah. Hi. So I think we can
Anupama,
start.
You can take over. I will mute and my slides won't be seeing. You can take over. Okay. Yeah.
So I think we have 9 candidates here for presentation. Each person having 8 minutes each. The first name is Akash PK. Akash is here.
Yes, madam. Hello.
Yes.
Madam, I'm here, madam.
Okay. So Akash, if you're ready to go, then we can start.
Shall I share my screen, madam?
Yes, sure.
Shall I begin, madam?
Yes, Akash.
A very good evening to all the faculty, respected members of the panel and my colleagues assembled here. I'm Dr. Akash PK. I'm doing my final year residency at SIT Hospital, Government Medical College, Trivandrum. I'm here to present a rare case of Krukenberg tumor in pregnancy, which came to our hospital. 29-year-old Mrs. X, who was a second gravida, previous normal delivery with a live child, spontaneously conceived, 8 weeks, 6 days of amenorrhea. She presented with complaints of abdominal distension for 2 months, abdominal pain for 1 week, and vomiting for 1 week at a local hospital. From there, UPT was done 1 day back and was found to be positive. They did an ultrasound at the referring hospital, which showed a single live intrauterine gestation of 8 to 9 weeks and a large abdominopelvic soft tissue mass with increased vascularity and ascites. And with these findings, she was referred to SIT Hospital. Further history taking, there was a history of loss of weight and loss of appetite was there. She didn't have any history of medical comorbidities or drug allergies, and she did not have any family history of malignancy. On examination, she was thin-built and ill-nourished. There was pallor present. Her vital signs were stable. There was no lymphadenopathy elicited. Cardiovascular system and respiratory system turned out to be normal findings. On abdominal examination, there was a cystic lesion 20 centimeter to 20 centimeter filling the hypogastrium, right iliac fossa, left iliac fossa, and umbilical region, of which the lower border was not felt. There was no tenderness over the lesion or any part of the abdomen for that matter. On per speculum examination, her cervix was looking healthy. Per vaginal examination, uterus was not separately made out, and the same abdominal was felt vaginally. Per rectal examination was done. The rectal mucosa was free, and the mass was felt more than 5 centimeters from the anal verge. Rectovaginal septum was intact. Further management, we did the investigations. Most of the investigations came out to be in the normal range, except for HB, which was 9 gram, and the tumor markers. Of the tumor markers, CA125 was 541 international units per liter. The other all tumor markers were normal, and we did an MRI suspecting malignancy, which showed markedly enlarged bilateral ovaries, right ovary 20 into 14 into 14 and left ovary 17 to 14 to 10 centimeter, with peripherally arranged multiple cysts and a large T2 hyperintense trauma with multiple blood vessels. There were no areas of diffusion restriction or hemorrhage. There was a large ascites present and a single live intrauterine gestation seen. The radiologist gave a DD. Their primary DD was ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, but according to the history, we couldn't be looking into that. And the second DD for the radiologist was bilateral malignant ovarian neoplasm. So we did an ultrasound at SAT, which showed more stroma than cystic spaces, and the shapes of ovaries were maintained. This was the scan, madam. Here we can see the single intrauterine gestation sac with the fetus there, and the one of the ovary with few cysts and more of the stroma, but the ovarian shape is more or less maintained. This is another ovary with the cystic spaces seen. So we made a primary differential diagnosis of a bilateral malignant ovarian neoplasm, probably a secondary one. To confirm the diagnosis, ultrasound-guided ascitic fluid tapping was done, but the cytology came out to be inconclusive. And side by side, we did, since our primary DD was a secondary ovarian tumor. We went for searching for the primary. The stool local blood came out to be negative. And an ultrasound breast, there was a small left fibroadenoma which was not clinically palpable. And ultrasound thyroid showed thyroiditis, while the TFT functions were normal. In chest X-ray, there was a bilateral pleural effusion, and we took an aspirate, which showed no evidence of malignancy. Since all our primary came out to be negative, we further proceeded with a guided FNAC from the left ovary, which was done at RCC. And meanwhile, the patient and bystanders were counseled about the risk of malignancy and the need for surgery and chemotherapy, and medical termination of pregnancy was done along with her consent, after taking her consent. And this guided FNAC actually came out to be metastatic polydifferentiated carcinoma with signet ring cells, signifying pointing to Krukenberg tumor. The cells are strongly positive for cytokeratin, but CK7 and CK20 for looking the primary was inconclusive. So after these things, the patient was referred to RCC for higher further treatment. There they did a repeat CA125, which came out to be 1123, that's increasing, and a CT scan of the stomach was taken. There was abdomen was taken. There were suspicious lesions in the stomach, followed which they did an upper GI endoscopy. Multiple biopsies taken from these lesions in the stomach, which also came out to be inconclusive. During this course, actually, she developed tumor deposits at the natal entry site of FNAC. So she was planned for primary neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Started on chemotherapy with 5 cycles, capecitabine and oxaliplatin, of which 5 cycles was given. Unfortunately, she didn't follow for the 6th cycle due to COVID pandemic, and she succumbed to respiratory failure in a month. Going to discussion part, Krukenberg tumor is a metastatic signet-ring adenocarcinoma of the ovary, which account to 1 to 2% of all ovarian tumors. But in pregnancy, only 3% of adnexal masses found are malignant, and prevalence of Krukenberg tumor in reproductive age is around 0.4%. Therefore, in total, it makes only 1 in 100,000 cases in pregnancy rare, and the primary sites are mostly stomach, 70%, followed by colon, appendix, and breast. These tumors have a poor prognosis. Median survival rate is around 7 to 14 months. In pregnancy, the increased blood supply to the ovaries can increase the chance of metastasis and also hasten the disease progress. As of now, we don't have any standardized guidelines for the treatment of Krukenberg tumor. Surgery can be done to remove the ovaries, but even then, the median survival rate once the tumor has been to the ovaries is around 14 months. Most cases are diagnosed late in pregnancy due to symptoms similar to pregnancy, such as distension and vomiting. The previous literature, all the cases were after 20 weeks, after 24 weeks and all. Take-home message is that even though this is a rare lesion to be found in pregnancy, we should have a high index of suspicion when there are bilateral ovarian masses in pregnancy. Thank you. These are my references, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Akash.
Thank you,
madam. Dr. Amrita and Dr. Mishra, any questions?
Dr. Akash, you said this lady was 29 years old.
Yes, madam.
Do you think there is any probability that this is a tumor which has a genetic basis? If so, can you back it up with what you have read about ovarian masses, Krukenberg tumors, and tumors in general arising in the younger age group?
Younger age group, there are genetic ovarian syndromes, madam, like BRCA1, BRCA2 and all. BRCA1 actually can...
But this is a metastatic tumor, right? This is a tumor which has arisen from the...
Even BRCA1 can cause primary in stomach rarely. Further evaluation was needed, but there was no family history for this patient, which is sort of a negative point in genetic tumors, madam. Hello.
Yes, what is the incidence of ovarian tumors in BRCA1 and 2 positive?
Madam, 25% to 40% in BRCA1 and around 15 to 25% in BRCA2, madam.
Okay. Dr. Anupama, Dr. Michelle, anything from your side?
So Akash, it's a rare case, yes.
Yes, madam.
Well worked up. And just a question, why was the Scopies not done in medical college before she went to RCC?
Madam, actually...
because you suspected a Krukenberg,
Yes,
We
madam.
went ahead with the through-cut biopsy, and scopies were not carried out immediately at that point of time.
Actually, we were planning for Scopy. Before that, the results came out to be this one. And
No, because a
so we,
biopsy report will take how many days in your place?
madam, we actually speeded it up in after discussing with the RCC. We actually speeded it up. It was obtained within 4 or 5 days, madam. Actually, we didn't do
So
Scopy.
there was enough time for scopies in between.
Yes, madam.
Why do you think the stomach had ulcers, but the stomach ulcers were negative?
Yes, madam. We,
You think it is a
Scopy,
more a problem of a biopsy, or is it there were non-specific ulcers?
Mostly, madam, they will be actually during the Scopy, we didn't pass into the duodenum because of that hyperreactivity in the stomach itself. And stomach lesions were actually highly suspicious of malignancy.
Suspicious,
Yeah,
yes.
but when we took it, the biopsy report came to be inconclusive, madam. Actually, it can be other sites also, madam. Stomach is the most common site of metastasis. It can be other sites, even biliary tract
but
can
you
also
had an
be.
ulcer in the stomach.
Yes, madam.
And a signet ring cell tumor in the ovary.
Yes,
just
that's
actually
why
just
we
curious, that's all.
Yes, thank you.
Dr. Michelle. So if there are no more questions, can we go on to the next presentation?
Madam.
Anjana,
Anjana, yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Anjana. Go ahead. So Anjana, your time is now 37. Once you share your screen, you can share your screen.
Shall I start, madam?
Yes, Anjana, you can start.
Good evening, teachers. I'll be presenting on neoadjuvant chemotherapy and fertility sparing surgery in advanced malignant germ cell tumor ovary. We know that malignant germ cell tumor ovary is a disease which is commonly seen among adolescents and women of reproductive age group. And the standard treatment for malignant ovarian germ cell tumor is fertility sparing surgery, that is preservation of uterus and at least part of an ovary whenever feasible, with or without adjuvant chemotherapy. But in around 30 to 40% patients, they might be presenting with advanced stage disease, and upfront fertility sparing surgery might not be feasible. That is, they might come with disease which is infiltrating into the uterus, or the patient might be having poor GC. And in according to the GCIG consensus review for germ cell tumor in 2014, they said that neoadjuvant chemotherapy is being increasingly used in patients with bulky malignant ovarian germ cell tumor in order to increase the chance of successful fertility preservation and to minimize the extent of surgery. And even the American Surgical Pediatric Association recommends neoadjuvant chemotherapy and later surgery in patients with advanced malignant germ cell tumor ovary. And the objective of the study was to analyze the outcome of patients with advanced malignant germ cell tumor ovary who underwent NACT followed by surgery at our institute, and to assess the menstrual and reproductive function in those who underwent conservative surgery. And this was a retrospective study, and data from 28 patients who underwent debulking surgery following neoadjuvant chemotherapy with BEP regimen was collected from January 2008 to March 2019 and analyzed, and the data was summarized using appropriate descriptive statistics. The median age group, the age of the patient was 16.5 years, and the majority of the patient had yolk sac tumor. That is, 12 patients had yolk sac tumor, and another 6 patients had mixed germ cell tumor, and 4 of them had yolk sac component, and 10 patients had dysterminoma. The 67.8% patient presented with stage 3 disease with massive ascites and peritoneal deposit, while 32.1% patient presented with stage 4 disease with pleural effusion. And all the patients had after diagnosis with either with tumor marker and either cytology or biopsy from the tumor, they received 3 to 4 courses of bleomycin, etoposide, and cisplatin regimen. And the majority of the patient, that is 82.2% patient, received 4 cycles of NACT, and 4 patients received 3 cycles of NACT. And there was progressive disease on neoadjuvant chemotherapy was noted in none of the patients. That is, all patients responded well to neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and we could take all the patients for cytoreductive surgery. And 24 patients, that is majority of the patient, 85.8%, underwent unilateral salpingo-oophorectomy. 2 patients had to undergo bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy due to bulky tumors in both the ovaries, and 2 patients underwent TAH plus BSO. But both these patients could undergo conservative surgery, but they opted for completion surgery as they had completed their family. And it was seen that complete pathological response was seen in 25 patients, that is 89.3% patient, and only 3 patients had tiny residual focus of tumor in the ovary. And so we could attain optimal cytoreduction in 100% patient. And among the patients who wish to retain fertility, that is among 26 patients, 24 patients, that is 92.3% patients could undergo fertility preserving surgery. And the patients were followed up for 76 months. 2 patients were lost to follow up, and 1 patient died who presented with the stage 4 dyscerminoma, later died due to disease recurrence. And we had to do completion surgery for another patient for a benign disease of the residual ovary, as she had already completed her family. And coming to the menstrual and reproductive function, 21 patients were eligible for evaluation. 16 patients had regular cycle. 1 patient had irregular cycle. 2 patients were detected to have primary amenorrhea, but this was prior to the, they were already diagnosed with primary amenorrhea prior to the detection of malignancy with elevated FSH, and 2 patients are still premenarchal. In our study, only 3 patients attempted pregnancy, and all the patients could conceive without any infertility treatment, with a total of 4 pregnancy, and there is no anomalous baby. Coming to the discussion, there are very few studies on neoadjuvant chemotherapy in germ cell tumor ovary. In one study by Liu et al. In patients with advanced yolk sac tumor, it was seen that NACT followed by surgery resulted in better optimal cytoreduction, lesser perioperative morbidity, and similar progression to survival compared to patients who underwent primary surgery. And in another study in India by Talukdar et al., they compared NACT followed by surgery with patients with primary cytoreduction, primary surgery followed by chemo, and it was seen that comparable survival outcome was seen in both the arms. 18 of 21 patients who received NACT resumed regular menstruation, and 10 became pregnant, and both the results were comparable to the standard group. In another study among patients with dyscerminoma who had primary surgery followed with or without adjuvant chemotherapy, they had to do non-fertility preservation surgery, that is bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy with or without hysterectomy in 18.4% patients. In our study, 92% patients who wish to preserve fertility could undergo fertility sparing surgery even though they presented with very advanced disease, and excluding 2 patients with primary amenorrhea and 2 who are still premenarchal, all patients who had fertility sparing surgery resumed menstruation, and all the 3 patients who attempted pregnancy has conceived. So concluding, NACT followed by surgery might be a reasonable option for patients with advanced malignant germ cell tumor ovary. With poor general condition, a fair fertility preservation might not be feasible. And NACT makes optimal cytoreduction possible in these patients while preserving fertility, and this is associated with a good reproductive outcome. These are my references. Thank you. Madam.
Question? Yeah, thank you, Anjana.
Thank
Questions?
Anjana?
Yes, ma'am.
Anjana, you mentioned 2 patients who had THBSO.
Yes,
why were they considered for upfront chemo? Because they had already completed the family. So what was the reason?
They had come with very poor GC, and they couldn't undergo a primary surgery. Their general condition was not good for a primary surgery, ma'am, because of the advanced disease. All the patients in the study, they had either stage 3 or stage 4 disease with pleural effusion, massive ascites, extensive peritoneal deposits, and some few patients were not their general condition was only very poor to tolerate primary surgery, so they received, ma'am.
Okay, right.
So Anjana,
Yes,
can you take me to the aims once more? What is your aim? So here you are analyzing the outcome of all patients with malignant germ cell tumors who underwent NACT, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So you're telling in this study period, this total of this many patients underwent neoadjuvant chemotherapy at your institutions.
Yes, ma'am.
And how many patients underwent primary surgery?
Ma'am,
what is the baseline
no, I
data?
haven't taken, ma'am. My IRB clearance was only for NACT followed by surgery. So
but at least baseline now, how many number of germ cell came and how many advanced? Because when you're looking at NACT, you need to know the outcome of the primary surgery as well, right?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, Actually, we are going for more of primary surgery only, ma'am. Only in rare circumstance we are giving NACT. Only when their condition is very poor we are, and maybe in a month we are seeing 1 or 2 cases. And another study by medical oncology people, it was seen that in patient who had a primary surgery followed by chemo, their survival is almost 95%, ma'am. In stage 1, I mean, it is.
So what is the survival in germ cell tumor stage 1?
Stage 1 is all more than 95%, ma'am.
So is that that is a routine survival, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Neoadjuvant, no, there is no studies which has seen about NACT, ma'am. Only the 2 studies which I have mentioned are there, and they have seen that it is outcome is comparable. Only studies in primary setting is
there are
present,
more studies. There are more studies, Anjana.
Okay,
There are
ma'am.
more studies.
And there are case reports,
And
ma'am.
you said the response. How did you assess the response? You did not
Here,
mention how the response were assessed.
Ma'am, with tumor marker and CT.
So each patient had a pre-op and a post-op CT. So that needs
Yes,
to
ma'am.
have been mentioned in your
Yes, ma'am.
slides.
Yes, ma'am.
And you said 92% had a complete response.
No, ma'am. Among 92% who wish to preserve fertility, that is.
But what happened to the 8% who wish to preserve fertility? They could not preserve fertility due to?
Ma'am, only 2 patients who wish to preserve fertility couldn't undergo fertility preservation in our study, ma'am.
Why
And
was
both
that?
the patient had like bilateral disease, and both the ovaries were totally replaced by tumor. We couldn't identify any normal area.
You said how did you try to identify the normal area? You said there was complete response after neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Then how?
No,
can
ma'am. It is not means pathological response, ma'am. It's a pathological response.
Yes. So if there is complete pathological response on gross, how will there be ovaries will be replaced by tumor?
No. Grossly there is disease, but pathological response is the ovaries will be containing only fibrosis and inflammatory.
So did you try to send a frozen section, or did you try to do a 2-sitting surgery to at least to preserve fertility in those patients? You could have tried.
No, ma'am.
You've got 100% path response. So those
actually, ma'am, the study.
So those 2 patients also the ovaries were normal. When you took out the ovaries, pathologically the ovaries were normal, right?
Ma'am, actually the study starts from 2008, and from so it maybe that time and all it was not a routine to send an intra frozen also, ma'am. Recently we are doing for all patients. Whenever in 2008, 2010, these 2 were that our initial patients, ma'am, who receive NACT, not the recent ones.
Anjana, what was the final histopath report of the patients who had BSO?
All were pathologically negative. They had 100% path response.
Yes, ma'am.
So
Ma'am,
no,
89.3%, ma'am. 10% had, the 3 patients had partial response only, but the patient who had BSO had only fibrosis, madam.
Fibrosis.
Yes, ma'am, and inflammatory reaction, but these were old patients, like in 2010, 11, that time we had done.
Okay.
Nowadays, we are trying to conserve more of ovary, ma'am, whatever is possible.
So any selection criteria that you're using for NACT and primary surgery in your center?
Ma'am, main thing is the general condition of the patient, ma'am. If they are tolerating, we are going, means if you feel the patient will be tolerating, and whether the uterus is infiltrated, only those patients.
How are you assessing the general condition? What scoring system are you using?
ECOG, ma'am. ECOG scoring only we are seeing, and if the patient is very general condition is too poor, then like ECOG 2 and all, we are going for NACT. And even tumor board, they are discussing with the medical oncologist also, we are discussing, and they also will be seeing the patient. And if both the surgical team and medical oncology team feels that this patient is better to go for NACT, then we send for NACT.
So fertility is not a concern when you're deciding for NACT?
It is a concern, ma'am. But
you said only ECOG is a concern when you're deciding PSA.
Even primary setting, if we feel advanced disease, if we are opening, but we try to remove, we try to do the surgery without increasing the like only the surgery for fertility preservation in primary. So
I'm sorry, Anjana, you're not clear.
Ma'am,
relax. Tell me. Yeah.
If we are feeling the uterus is infiltrated by the disease, also we are going for.
It's not about uterus. It's about what happens when 2 ovaries are involved. Is it a selection criteria for neoadjuvant chemotherapy?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes or no?
Yes, I mean,
Now or during the study period?
no, ma'am. It was not. Actually, currently, now we are, I mean, even if both the ovaries are involved, we go for primary
And
surgery.
a
The
good
patient
PS patient, good ECOG
Yes, ma'am.
patient with
we
both
can go
ovaries
for
involved, will
primary
you take
surgery,
for
and then we can go for
primary surgery or neoadjuvant chemotherapy?
neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Sorry, ma'am.
Okay. And is there any chemoprotective agents that you're using for these
Anupama,
patients?
sorry to interrupt. We are actually a little short of time.
Yes, we'll go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay.
So last question, is there
Yes,
any
ma'am.
chemoprotective agents that you're using?
We are not using, ma'am, but studies, I mean, there are people who say we can give GnRH analogs. In all our patients, we are not giving, but we have seen good menstrual and reproductive outcome, irrespective of not giving GnRH analog, ma'am.
One more question, Anjana. Do you use
Yes, ma'am.
laparoscopy for your patients post chemo? Patients who have complete response?
No, ma'am.
All
For
patients
germ cell,
open.
usually, no, ma'am. Actually, we go in epithelial tumors, not in germ cell tumor. Germ cell, usually we see good responses there. We don't go for laparoscopy,
Okay.
but for epithelial, we go, ma'am.
Okay, Anjana.
So sorry to take more time. We'll, Dr. Chandani, if you're ready, we'll start with you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Kalpana?
Yeah, madam.
Dr. Kalpana.
madam.
Dr. Kalpana, you're ready. You can start your presentation.
Yeah, madam. It's not
Yes,
a
we
study,
can.
madam. I just wanted to tell about the screening methods, madam. Shall I start,
Yes,
madam?
your time starts now. Yes.
Shall I start, madam?
Yes, please.
Make it.
Screening in gynecology. Shall I start, madam?
Yes.
Yes, can.
Screening in gynecology. It is a strategy used to detect. It is a strategy used to detect diseases in population to detect disease among healthy population without symptoms of disease. Purpose is to decrease the mortality due to the disease rate. Patient may choose to undergo screening tests without symptoms. This is appropriate for scanning high prevalence of disease through natural history, resolution, and modes of progression. Detection of early stage disease amenable treatment. Method used is simple, cheap, specific, and sensitive, acceptable, disciplined, and accessible. Disease screened cervix, pap smear, visual inspection with acetic acid, colposcopy, uterus and ovaries by endometrial biopsy, ultrasound, CT, and MRI. Cervical cytology oral sensitivity is 61 to 64%, specificity is 99 to 99.4%, positive predictive value for invasive carcinoma is 95%. False negative rate depends on the quality of the smear taking and laboratory about 3 to 30%. Types are conventional slide, fluid-based cytology, new technology like automation for cervical cancer screening. Papricular test. It was founded by Dr. George Papricular. Detects cancerous and precancerous changes in the cervix. In addition, may also detect infection and abnormalities in the endometrium. Screening schedule for CA cervix, less than 21 years, no screening is needed. 21 to 29 years, cytology every 3 years. 30 to 65 years, cytology plus HPV testing every 5 years. If going only for cytology every 3 years. More than 65 years, no need. But if there is any abnormal lesions within 10 years, we can again go for screening. How to interpret a cytology report? Histological grading are Bethesda. Histological grading is by CIM 1, 2, 3 and by Bethesda. We are doing with the Bethesda system. Atypical squamous cell like ASCUS, ASH, LSIL, HSIL, HCC, AGC, AGC, AIS. Conventional versus fluid-based method. In conventional, cells can be obscured by blood mucus and inflammation. This is not there in liquid-based cytology. Advantages of LBC is eliminate air-dry defect, inflammatory cells, blood mucus, increase the detection of abnormal cytology. HPV DNA testing. The screening method of detecting the presence of HPV DNA. There are two methods: visual inspection with acetic acid and colposcopy. HPV-based instead of cytology-based screening, triage of patient as we to ask us high-risk HPV predicts high-grade SIL in the absence of cytology abnormality, molecular variant predicts carcinoma. Visual inspection with acetic acid, that is EIA. Grossly, the normal cervix is pink and smooth. In EIA, 3 to 5% acetic acid is applied to the cervix. Areas of the cervix which turn white or abnormal vascular pattern are often considered for biopsy. If no these abnormal cells have increased nuclear protein, higher cytoplasmic nuclear ratio. The acid correlates the protein causing the white reaction. The test is considered positive when it turns white. Colposcopy is a medical diagnostic procedure to examine and eliminate a magnified view of the cervix and the tissue of the vagina and vulva. In cases where pap smear and BIS are positive and biopsy is to be done, colposcopy allows direct biopsy, sampling and close examination of normal and abnormal appearing tissue. Aspartic solution and iodine solution are applied to the cervix to improve visualization of abnormal areas. This is a summary of cervical cancer screening guidance. Like when it comes negative, ask us what we are supposed to do. That's what we are supposed to do. I'm skipping this slide, madam. Ovarian cancer risks are like baseline. There is 1.5% risk. As there is relatives are more affected, the risk will increase, and mutation will also increase the risk up to 40%. Why screening for ovarian cancer is so difficult? Anatomic location of the ovary not easily accessible fact, well-defined precursor lesion and as only defined natural history, low prevalence, lack of good method. Methods used is there isophosphatidylate acid, not cost effective, may be considered in high-risk population, no place for population. Elevated in 82% of ovarian cancer and less than 1% of NP, but rising pattern over time in ovarian cancer. Limitation, lack of sensitivity in stage 1 disease, poor specificity, best for prognosis and follow-up. Recent guidelines, primary screening you go with TVS. If it is normal, repeat up to 1 year. Abnormal, simple cyst is there, then repeat every 4 to 6 weeks. Complex cyst is there, then repeat every 2 weeks. If it is abnormal, go for second to screening and surgery. Endometrial cancer, high prevalence in the West. Precursor lesion is atypical endometrial hyperplasia, accessibility of endometrial family. High cure rate for early disease, majority detected at early stage because of abnormal bleeding, especially postmenopausal bleeding. Not justified in population. Excellent prognosis of majority of carcinoma endometrial. Endometrial aspiration is done by people sensitivity for endometrial carcinoma is 94% and sensitivity for hyperplasia is 31%. Drawbacks is discomfort to patient, lack of known efficiency in asymptomatic.
Kalpana, you have 1 more minute.
Yeah, madam. Ultrasound is advantages for its ability to visualize structures, screening and evaluation of pelvic masses. CT is a medical imaging method employing tomography. CT is sensitive method for diagnosis of abdominal disease. However, it has limited application in the evaluation of non-invasive method useful
Yeah, Dr. Kalpana, your time, sir.
Yeah, madam. This is my conclusion, madam. Better late than never, please.
So just, I think you would be knowing, Kalpana, this is a paper forum where you're supposed to present the results of a study or
yeah, madam. Yeah,
which you have. This is not a paper presentation where you're, this is not a lecture or a topic discussion.
Okay, madam. Yeah.
So I think we'll pass on to the next speaker.
Yeah.
Dr. Nisha Suresh.
Madam, she is not able to join today. She has put a message.
Okay, Dr. Chandni also will not be joining again, right?
Chandani is
So
not joining?
she was having trouble with her audio. She's not come back yet. So we can we go on to Dr. Chaitra?
Yes, ma'am, please. Can I start, ma'am?
Yes, Chaitra.
Good evening to everybody. Hello, my dear friends, respected judges and my dear friends. Today, I'll be talking about a very interesting topic called in preventive gynecology, that is cervical cancer screening test uptake among healthcare workers in a tertiary care hospital where I work. It's Lutz Hospital in Ernakulam. So it was interestingly in December when the Globocon 2021 released its data, that the second leading cause of cancer-related deaths in Indian women is cervical cancer. Around 25,000 women die every year out of this. That's when I started thinking, should we do something about it? Yes, definitely. We know that Pap tests are being very effective and very specific and sensitive in detecting cervical lesion, and also the HPV testing. But why is it not being uptaken by our society? That's when we started thinking this. And the WHO also has called for cervical cancer elimination by 2030. And we gynecologists have a central role in making these programs successful. So we just took up a study telling that the cervical cancer screening barriers and facilitators among healthcare workers in a tertiary care hospital. We all know that the prevalence of cervical cancer screening in India per se is hardly less than 10%. 6 to 7% to be specific. And why is it so less? If it's in the general public, what is so in the healthcare workers who are well versed with all these things? So I divided the aims into 3 parts: to know the knowledge, attitude, and practice of these female healthcare workers regarding the screening program, especially in the hospital-based setup. Since it was a pandemic, I couldn't go to the community base. I did it inside the hospital. And the second part was to see after giving a close group discussion, clearing all their clarifications about doubts about this testing, how did they take up in the next step? And the third part was to look into the barriers and facilitators in which way we can rectify and improve our screening methodology. So the study went on like this. 441 women consented for the study in our hospital, and it was an observation study for a 3-month period from January to March 21st. And it was based on a structured questionnaire pre-validated from the previous studies which were done in the community base, assessing the knowledge, attitude, and practice of these women. And the health awareness program was conducted with the help of my all colleagues in the gynecology department. I'm very thankful to them. And we tried to clear all the doubts, and we then went about collecting the data. The data had 2 parts. The part 1 was socio-demographic data and the HPV vaccination status of the women. The second one was knowledge, attitude, and practice. The knowledge was scaled using what are the risk factors for cervical cancer, what are screening facilities, how are the preventive measures on a 19 MCQs, like multiple choice questions, and 16 point was given, 0 for minimum and 16 for maximum. So anybody who scored between 13 to 16 was told to have good knowledge, and anybody between 13 to 8 was moderate, and below 8 was poor average knowledge. So the attitude was on the Likert scale, where we see there were 8 questions with minimum 8 score and maximum 40 score, each one telling very strongly agree whether she has to do a Pap test, why she should not do a Pap test, what are the other screening, like the multiple questions were there. So the practice, whether if they have taken a Pap test in the past 3 years or a HPV test in the past 5 years, they were taken to as regularly practicing this method, and those who have not taken were taken as no practice. And a descriptive statistic analysis was used. And after each session was conducted in a weekly once manner on Saturdays when they were all having leisure time in the hospital. 1 hour session in the closed group discussion, either by online to the digital media or in day-to-day one-on-one communication in the classroom areas. And we try to note, and we just invited them to come to the gynec department and get their Pap test at the end of the all sessions. And also the post-test sessions, the questionnaire was repeated, and we checked how much of improvement was there in the KAP. So this was a socio-demographic profile. As you can see, majority of women in the hospital were of 30 to 49 year age group. And they were living in the urban vernaculum, and most of them were Christians and married women with multi-para status. And they were all majority of not following any family planning techniques. And since they were all healthcare workers, there was no illiterate in our group, and majority of them have finished their college or nursing at least. And as you can see, majority of them constituted clinical nursing staff, which is 67%, 298 of them. And some interesting finding was some of my doctor colleagues also were not aware that when they should start screening, why should they should start screening. Many of them thought it should be after 45. So even though they had learned in their schoolings, they would have forgotten it. So this was how it was, and majority of them are having good socio-economic background. And as you can see, this is a highlighted slide. Good knowledge was seen in majority of the women, and attitude was positive towards the screening methodology in 57% of the women. But when it comes to the practice, regular practice of doing Pap test was seen in only 42 women, that is 10% of the women. And majority, 85% of the women are not having any practice for this pap test in these women. So after these sessions of close discussion, when we asked them to come to the gynec department and do the testing of pap test, but I should stress that it was not a free test, it was a subsidized rate. So they could do that. Only 65 of the women who were eligible, like those unmarried were dropped out, who already have done pap test were dropped out. Out of this, only 19% turned out and did their pap test in this 3 months period. So looking into the discussion, we can see in the community-based studies that hardly 6.9% women are doing. There is a gap between the awareness and practice of the cervical cancer screening, which required to be addressed. And it is also shown that continuous conducting of cervical cancer screening program will bring change in the attitude and perception of the women towards cervical cancer screening, especially regarding fear of cervical screening, vaginal examination, cancer diagnosis, that parts. So this is one more interesting study from Ghana, where they have described institutional barriers, personal barriers, social barriers, and the different barriers which are there in the society and how we go about. And this is what we proposed. Ma'am, do I have 1 minute more?
Yes, you have 1 minute.
1 minute.
Thank you, ma'am. So the majority of the time we have to be empathetic, and we can promote self-sampling, public health policies to be brought in, and community awareness programs. And definitely the gynecologists and family physicians do need continued medical education to increase their perception for the seriousness. And we need more of national cervical cancer screening programs like what we have for immunization in maternal child health care, and also the immunization program for kids. Similarly, we need cancer screening programs, and we should encourage this, incentivizing these women to come forward and do the pap testing, and enforcing the law is also a very important point. These are all the points facilitators we found while during the discussions and noting down these questionnaires. So we would conclude that screening alone in the community levels can encourage and increase the awareness by mass media education, but it has to be enforced in some point or the other way. This research has raised numerous practical and policy issues which need urgent attention. So I would like to highlight that in this facilitators, the peer communication was very useful, like one sister telling to the other sister and the staff. Then the planned communication of bringing them together and explaining was very useful. And what we felt is we should make it compulsory for all pre-employment checkups, and opportunity screening in the antenatal visits should be made compulsory. By this thing, we can improve the screening rate up to 70%, which is the goal of the WHO right now. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Amrita, Michelle?
Chaitra,
Yes, ma'am.
good work, Chaitra, very relevant in this context. Two questions. Which vaccine would you advise if somebody came to you for a vaccine, HPV vaccine?
Ma'am, right now available are 2 vaccines in India, Cervarix and Gardasil. Cervarix covers the high-risk papilloma virus for cervical cancer specific, whereas the Gardasil is for, although quadrivalent. I have come across 2 case reports of Gardasil having GBS, so I'm a little scared. I do prefer Cervarix right now. I don't know, maybe it is biased, but Cervarix is the one, the bivalent. Nanovalent is not available in India, ma'am.
Okay,
So
what
Chaitra,
about the self?
sorry.
Carry on, carry on.
So Chaitra, I had a question about, you said you were in an observational study,
Yes, ma'am.
but you did an intervention. You did the awareness session was part of the study or not part of the study?
Awareness session, we, after doing a small pilot study, we wanted to give them
So
awareness.
this is an
so that we
intervention
see
study.
them. Yes,
So this is
ma'am.
an intervention study. Was ethics committee approval taken for the study? Was
Yes,
an
ma'am.
informed
Informed
that-
written
that was-
consent was taken, and IRB review was sent.
sent? So that was not mentioned, and I don't think this would be an observation study because you're doing an intervention and then assessing the response of the intervention, right? And in your results, your conclusions, I could not see the results matching your conclusion. Can you take me to your conclusions? So you said community levels can be, screening can be encouraged by mass media education. So what mass media education were done in your study to have a conclusion but like this?
Ma'am, the mass media education was in terms of the one-on-one communications, the talks, the health talks were given. We sat in the classroom with a group of 30 to 40 women, and
So
we were educating
you said
them.
screening and community. What community screening was done? You did an institutional screening, right? You
Ma'am,
didn't
only
one
among
institution.
healthcare workers.
So there was no community screening done in your study. How
I
can you
just put it
conclude
because
that
it was
community?
healthcare
So you are
community. Yes.
extrapolating healthcare screening can be improved. community screening can be improved just because healthcare workers took more number of pap smears after the study? Was more number of pap smears taken after the study?
No, not much, ma'am. Even though it was initially the baseline
So
was
what is
10%.
the impact of your study?
Yes, ma'am. By doing this education for awareness, we could only increase the level by 10% more. 10%
Yes,
more.
and that
So,
you yourself mentioned there was some cost concession offered by the hospital, right?
very minimal, ma'am. Very minimal.
So is that the cost is the barrier?
Yes, cost was definitely a barrier which
So
we
that
mentioned.
that was never mentioned.
No.
I think time's up. We'll go on to the
Time's
next.
up.
And
Okay.
cost
Thank you,
factor
Chaitra.
48%. Yes.
Dr. Deepthi.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible, madam?
Yes.
My presentation.
Yes, you can see your presentation.
Good evening. My topic is pediatric ovarian tumor and how is it different from an adult. I have a case series. So the first case was a 13-year-old girl who came with the complaints of lower abdominal pain, distension, and fullness per abdomen. On examination, she had a mass per abdomen. So we proceeded with an ultrasound and sent for tumor markers. The ultrasound showed a heterogeneous lobulated lesion, 12 into 11 centimeters with increased vascularity. The findings were confirmed with an MRI. And there was the left ovary was not separately visualized. The uterus was normal. There was no enlarged lymph nodes. The tumor markers, LDH came raised, AFP, beta HCG, and CA125 was normal. We proceeded with the fertility sparing right salpingo-oophorectomy, infracholic omentectomy, and lymph node biopsy with the help of a gynecologist. A midline incision was made, and the large bosselated tumor was removed. And we proceeded with the infracholic omentectomy and also did a lymph node dissection and sent it for histopathological examination. In histopathology, it came as dysgerminoma with lymph node positivity. Following surgery, in view of positive lymph nodes, she was referred to an oncologist and treated as stage 3 with chemotherapy, bleomycin, etoposide, and cisplatin. Patient was on follow-up with tumor markers. The second case was similar, 11-year-old girl with a mass per abdomen, which was an 8 into 8 centimeters mass, which was confirmed by an ultrasound and CT. Tumor markers done, the AFP was raised, but the other tumor markers came as normal. So again, we proceeded with the laparotomy, fertility sparing right salpingo-oophorectomy. We took the peritoneal fluid for cytology, did an infracholic omentectomy and a lymph node biopsy, and it came as a yolk sac tumor with peritoneal fluid, omentum, and lymph nodes was negative. So she was taken as stage 1 and referred to an oncologist and kept for, and patient was just on follow-up. So most of the ovarian tumors in adolescent are germ cell tumors, and this incidence is 15% of all cancers above the age of 15. Abdominal pain is their most common symptom. Ultrasound is used for the initial evaluation, and CT and MRI helps us to understand more about the tumor, the site, the origin, the extent, and metastasis. Germ cell tumors, the most common tumors are mature cystic teratoma, and the most common malignant is dysgerminoma. The others are yolk sac tumor, embryonal carcinoma, non-gestational choriocarcinoma, immature teratoma, and mixed germ cell tumor. Tumor markers always aid in the diagnosis and detection of residual or progressive disease. Alpha fetoprotein, beta HCG, LDH, and inhibin A are the few tumor markers. Now here, there is a modification of the FIGO staging, which was done by the Children's Oncological Group. It was a surgico-pathological staging, which refines the FIGO system. So as our FIGO suggests, a positive peritoneal washings come in FIGO stage 1C3. In COG, it is upstage to COG stage 3 because of the higher risk of tumor recurrence. And if there is gliomatosis peritoni, only if there is mature glial tissue, then it is taken as malignant. And mandatory ascitic or peritoneal fluid cytology should be done. So in stage 1 of COG staging, the tumor is intact and there is no violation of the capsule. The peritoneal cytology, peritoneum, omentum are all negative. The lymph node is also negative. In stage 2, Like our FIGO stage 1C1 and 1C2, if there is a violation of the capsule during surgery or prior to surgery, then it is stage 2. Or if the tumor is removed laparoscopically by morcellation, also it is stage 2. And peritoneal cytology, omentum, lymph nodes, negative. Stage 3 is when the lymph nodes are positive and when the peritoneal fluid cytology is positive. There is a stage 3X, that is otherwise the patient would have been stage 1 or 2, but because we failed to collect the peritoneal fluid cytology or biopsy abnormal lymph nodes or biopsy abnormal peritoneal surfaces, she has become stage 3X. Stage 4 is similar to FIGO, which is metastatic disease and pleural fluid with positive cytology. So COG surgical guidelines tells us that we must collect the peritoneal fluids or washings for cytology, examine peritoneal surfaces, palpate the retroperitoneal lymph nodes, inspect the omentum, inspect and palpate the opposite ovary, and biopsy only if abnormal, and complete resection of the involved ovary with sparing of fallopian tube if not involved. Standard approach is fertility sparing salpingo-oophorectomy. 90% of the children are in germs present at stage 1. Recurrence rate is high for stage 2 and stage 3, but they are highly chemosensitive. They respond very well to cisplatin-based 3-agent chemotherapy. And they have a very excellent prognosis. Overall survival rate is 95 to 99%, and most cases require only observation and follow-up. And during the past decade, we have made substantial progress in the understanding of germ cell tumors, and COG staging has helped in proper management and follow-up of the patient. Thank you.
Thank you. Amrita, Michelle.
Deepti, what was the relevance of a change in staging, the FIGO versus the COG staging? Why did you highlight that?
Madam, because in FIGO, usually when in a pediatric age group, if we go for a laparoscopic management of the case, and if we morcellate a large tumor, then there is it becomes upstage to stage 2. And also if we, the peritoneal fluid cytology, like I told, FIGO, it comes as stage 1C3. Here it is a stage 3. That means it will require further chemotherapy. If it is unlike a stage 1, which mostly requires only observation and does not need a chemotherapy.
Did you mention that surface implants on the liver is stage 4 according to COG?
No, madam. Surface implants is stage.
Your slide, I mean, I just
only parent. Yes. Parenchyma. Surface implants.
Okay, surface implants stage 3. Okay.
Yes, parenchyma is stage 4.
Dr. Deepti, I missed out on some of your slides. Can you show me the results portion, please?
Madam, it was just a case series. I just wanted to highlight the difference between a FIGO and a COG staging.
Okay, you don't have.
No.
What are the number of patients in your case series, and what was your results like? I missed out on a few slides. My net was.
Madam, actually I had 4 cases, but because the time was reduced to 6 minutes, I cut off 2 cases from that. So both my cases, one was a dysgerminoma and one was a yolk sac tumor. The other 2 cases were immature cystic teratoma and again another dysgerminoma. Mostly, even though dysgerminoma usually presents in a very early stage and it requires only observation, and in our particular case it was actually a stage 3. So in spite of the findings showing negative lymph nodes, when we did a biopsy we found out that it was positive and it came as stage 3, and she responded well to chemotherapy.
Were all your patients juvenile or did you have adult patients?
No, madam. I took only juvenile patients.
Juvenile patients. What was their average age?
Average age was 13 years, madam.
13.
Yes.
And you have followed them up for how many months or years?
Madam, 1 year actually. We didn't get Usually we send them to other centers for chemotherapy and they just come. Usually we miss them for follow-up. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Deepti.
Thank you.
So shall we move on to Dr. Danya? Danya, Dr. Danya, you're there, right?
Yes, yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Am I
think we
audible?
can- Yes.
Are my slides visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not able to start the video somehow. It's coming as failed to start the video camera. Shall I start the
No
presentation?
problem, Danya, you can start.
Okay. Oh, okay. Good evening.
Is it okay with the organizers? Can we start without her video? Jodi?
Yeah, please, no issue. If you're comfortable.
Yes.
Good evening, respected judges and other members of the faculty. The topic of my study is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the surgical care of patients with gynecological cancers experienced from a regional cancer center in South India. The threat of COVID-19 to women with gynecological cancers has been substantial. There have been delays in seeking treatment, delays in diagnosis, delays in administering treatment. The hospital visit itself exposes the patient to COVID infection. And in the initial days of the pandemic, we also had to deal with limited resources, limited personnel, and short supply of protective gear. And with more and more of the general hospitals gearing up for management of the COVID patients, we had limited treatment facilities for cancer patients in other centers. The aim of our study was to assess the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on gynecological oncology, surgical practice, and postoperative morbidity in a tertiary cancer center compared to the year before the pandemic. It was a retrospective observational study, and it included all patients undergoing surgery for gynecological malignancies in Regional Cancer Center, Trivandrum, during the first 6 months of the COVID pandemic, that is between March 1st of 2020 and August 31st of 2020, compared to patients undergoing surgery for gynecological malignancies during the same period in 2019. Clinical and demographic data were obtained from electronic medical records, and the data collected included patient demographics, performance status of the patient, comorbidities, cancer status, COVID-19 status, surgical procedures and its complexity, postoperative stay, and also the all morbidity outcomes related to the surgery. Statistical analysis was done through independent t-test to compare quantitative parameters, chi-square test and Fisher's exact test to find the association between categorical variables, and Mann-Whitney U-test to compare ordinal parameters. The total number of surgeries done during the study period was significantly less in 2020. It was 76 in 2020 compared to 316 patients in 2019. The mean age of the patients was similar, 52.7 in 2020 compared to 51.1 in 2019. Patients with performance score, ECOG performance score more than or equal to 2 was 5.8% in 2020 versus 4.3% in 2019. It was not statistically significant. Since a study was conducted during the first early months of the pandemic, and also because Kerala fared quite well in controlling the pandemic during the early months, only 3 of our patients had tested positive for COVID-19. And these patients had their surgeries 1 month after testing negative. Also, we used to strictly advise our patients regarding self-quarantining for 14 days prior to the surgery, and also regarding the use of masks and eye shields. Minimally invasive procedures had come down from 8.9% in 2019 to 3.9% in 2020. However, the difference was not statistically significant. Neoadjuvant chemotherapy for ovarian cancer was used in a greater percentage of patients in 2020. That is 96% in 2020 compared to 88% in 2019. Again, the difference was not statistically significant. Complex procedures comprised 16.3% of patients of the total surgeries in 2020 compared to 17.5% in 2019. Intraoperative blood transfusions were used in 10.3% of patients in 2020 compared to 6.6% of patients in 2019. Postoperative ventilation was used for 5.2% of patients in 2020 compared to 3.6% in 2019. Unplanned readmissions, although the percentages of many of these parameters was high in 2020, none of them were found to be statistically significant. Unplanned readmissions were 5.2% versus 2.8%. We had one postoperative mortality each in 2020 and 2019. The mortality in 2020 was a patient who tested positive in the preoperative period, a case of advanced ovarian cancer. Her surgery was delayed in view of being COVID positive. And during the waiting period, after testing negative, after testing negative, she had a bowel perforation, went into sepsis, got admitted and underwent an emergency surgery. And although the surgery was done, she succumbed postoperatively to septicemia. These are the postoperative morbidity outcomes compared in the 2 years. Blood transfusions, we had a slightly higher percentage in 2020 compared to 2019. Pneumonia, febrile illness, and post-op ileus was also seen in a higher percentage of patients. Post-op ventilation, wound infection, likewise, and unplanned readmissions also. Although the percentages did not come out to be statistically significant, one limitation was the short study period, and also that the study period included the early months of the pandemic where the COVID positivity rates were not so much. We are continuing the study for the next 1 year to get a full picture, and hopefully the differences will then become significant. So there was a significant reduction in the number of cases operated, an increase in the utilization of neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Despite the restrictions imposed by the pandemic, we continued doing extensive surgeries and also minimally invasive surgeries, although at lower rates. The difference in postoperative morbidity was not found to be statistically significant. And also preoperative COVID testing in combination with self-isolation and strict advocation of protective measures was efficient in preventing perioperative COVID-19 infection. The limitations of the study include—
Tanya, 1 minute.
Yes, sure. It includes the limited study period, and also that the study included the early months of the pandemic where the COVID load was not so much. It has also has a low representation of COVID positive cases. And like I said, we are planning to continue the study for the further 1 year and hoping to get a actual picture of difference in morbidity. Thank you.
Thank you, Danya.
Can I ask a question, Dr. Anupama?
Oh, yes, Amrita, please.
Dr. Danya, that was a very interesting presentation and very contemporary also because of the COVID pandemic. I have just one doubt. You said the neoadjuvant chemotherapy rate was 96% in 2020, whereas in the previous year it was 88%. So being a tertiary referral institute, I expect most of the cases are in stage 3, stage 4. So do you have anything, can you explain the rate of 88% neoadjuvant chemotherapy?
This percentage was exclusively for the stage 3C ovaries. I've included only those patients in that. Only the advanced ovarian cancer cases. And our rates of primary cytoreduction in RCC around are between 10 to 15%. So 88% is our usual rate of NACTs.
Has it always been consistently around 80%?
It's between 10 to 15 is our rates of primary cytoreduction.
Primary cytoreduction.
Yes.
And what percentage of them appear in stage 3, stage 4?
More than 90%.
Okay. Yes, over to you, Anupama and Michelle.
Danya,
Yes.
there was a less number of minimal invasive surgeries during the COVID period.
Yes. Yes.
Any particular reason why there was a reduced number? And what were the cases that you take up for minimal invasive surgery?
Okay. We routinely do most of our endometrial cancers by minimally invasive surgery. The issue that I found while I was going through the case sheets was that our study period was between March and August. And during March and April, we had the initial strict lockdowns where we had been forced to cut down our surgeries so much. And even after we started the surgeries in May, initially there was so much of concerns regarding restarting laparoscopy during the period of COVID and that aerosol spread of COVID and all that. And it took us some time to get back to our laparoscopic surgeries. That's why our MIS rates have been low in 2020. And further after August, actually we have picked up, and nowadays we are doing most of our endometrial cancers through laparoscopy.
Yeah, so that would be the way forward, probably, when the cases are increasing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Danya. Just one question. Have you compared whether any stage migration compared to 2020 versus 2019? Were you seeing more advanced endometrioms, or were the stages were same, or was it not compared? Just curious. It's not related to your presentation.
I have compared it, but it wasn't significant. There was no significant difference.
Okay. So the delay did not affect them much.
Yes.
Okay.
There was a higher percentage in almost all the categories that I studied, but statistical significance was very less.
Okay.
What was statistically significant among the things you studied? Because most of them were not statistically significant, right?
The number of surgeries was statistically
Most of it wasn't. Yeah. The number of surgeries, reduction in the number of surgeries was the
it's a lockdown effect.
Yes.
Okay, then. Thank you.
Thank you.
So can we move on to the next, Amrita and Michelle? Can we move on?
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you, Danya.
Yeah.
So I think we have Dr. Sajita Surendran.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, can you see the slides, ma'am?
Yes.
Sajita.
Okay, ma'am. Good evening, respected judges. My topic
Can't see you, but.
Oh, can't see. Yeah. The video.
Is it, if it is difficult, leave.
Ma'am, is it gone? Yeah.
Yes. Okay, no problem. Start.
Okay. Good evening, respected teachers. Sorry for the delay. My topic of presentation is metastaticectomy in oligometastatic CO ovary. Ovarian cancer is the third most common cancer among females in India, and which shows a recurrence of around 70 to 90%. And the treatment of recurrence still remains challenging. Although the use of secondary cytoreduction to treat recurrent disease is becoming more common, the utility remains still controversial. So I'm going to discuss two cases which were managed by cytoreduction, recurrences which were managed by cytoreduction. Case one is a 61-year-old postmenopausal lady. She was diagnosed with advanced CO ovary in 2017. She was treated initially with neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by interval cytoreduction. And she completed her chemotherapy in February 2018. After a disease-free interval of 2.5 years, she had elevated CA125 levels, and she was evaluated initially by ultrasound followed by a PET CT, which showed an FDG with solitary lesion around 2.5 centimeters in segment around 5 to 6 of liver, and with an SUV of 10.3. And she had another lesion right in the right iliac fossa around 11 millimeter with an uptake of 3.5. She underwent liver metastasectomy in November 2020, and intraoperatively she had a 3 into 3 centimeter nodular deposit in segment 5 of liver and another 2 into 1 centimeter deposit in right ilia fossa peritoneum. Followed by this, she received 6 cycles of adjuvant chemotherapy, and she is currently under follow-up. And case 2 is a 57-year-old postmenopausal lady with history of ovarian tumor, which was diagnosed in 2000. That time she underwent surgical staging outside, and pathology report came as granulosous cell tumor ovary, and she was in stage 1C, grade 3, and with this report she was referred to our center, and she received adjuvant chemotherapy with BEP. After the disease-free interval of 13 years, her ultrasound in 2013 showed right liver lobe lesion 2.4 centimeters, for which she received chemotherapy, carboplatin and paclitaxel 6 cycles, followed by USG, which showed no liver lesions. And again, after a disease-free interval of 4 years, in 2017, she had right upper limb pain, which was evaluated by imaging, which showed 3.8 into 3 centimeter segment 7 liver lesion, for which again she was treated with chemotherapy, carboplatin, along with paclitaxel, and the USG done after chemotherapy showed complete resolution of the liver lesion. After another disease-free interval of 3 years, she again had ultrasound and CT imaging in August 2020 showed subcapsular liver deposit indenting parenchyma 3 into 2 centimeter, for which she underwent liver metastasis. This time she underwent liver metastasectomy. In top, there was a 4 into 3 centimeter liver lesion in segment 7 of liver. And pathology report came as metastasis from granulosous cell tumor. And she received adjuvant chemotherapy, cisplatin along with etoposide. So coming to discussion, ovarian cancer spread occurs mainly through intraperitoneal, lymphatic and hematogenous spread. And the most common sites of spread are peritoneum, liver, and lymph nodes. Several studies have shown a strong relationship between survival and R0 cytoreduction. And this benefit of survival extends to secondary, tertiary, and quaternary cytoreductions. Winter et al., coming to liver recurrence, Winter et al. Has reported hepatic parenchymal metastasis, which represents 18% of metastatic CA ovary. And he has described it as second most frequent cause of stage 4 disease. And because of the improved surgical techniques, intraoperative and postoperative ICU care, nowadays liver resection is becoming increasingly safer procedure. Studies from 2009 onwards, the studies like Desktop 3 and SOC1 trial have showed improvement in disease-free survival and total survival of patients undergoing hepatic metastasectomy. These studies have shown the benefit of secondary cytoreduction. So regardless of the type, so Desktop 3 trial and SOC1 has shown improved survival benefit in secondary cytoreduction. And several studies from 2009 onwards have shown improvement in disease-free survival and total survival of patients undergoing hepatic metastasectomy, regardless of the type of primary neoplasia. A study by Camel et al. Matched the patients between liver surgery to chemotherapy only. He obtained a clear difference with statistical significance of 53 versus 21 months median overall survival from time to diagnosis of liver metastasis. So coming to conclusion, liver resection should be considered in selected patients who have a limited extent of metastatic disease from ovarian carcinoma. This could be an effective and feasible approach for primary to quaternary cytoreduction and may confer survival benefit to patients.
Dr. Sajita, what do you mean by ovarian carcinoma?
Uncontrolled proliferation of ovarian.
What are the different types of ovarian carcinomas?
Epithelial tumors, germ cell tumors, stromal tumors, unclassified tumors.
And the references you have mentioned for epithelial tumors or for stromal tumors, do you think they can be grouped together?
No, ma'am. We cannot group it together. One case is epithelial
so what is the conclusion of your study?
We can consider solitary oligometastatic lesions, we can consider cytoreductive surgeries for oligometastatic ovary recurrences, ma'am.
And you group together stromal and epithelial together. Okay.
Yeah, I have mentioned one case of epithelial and one case of stromal.
So you are not limiting it only to carcinomas. You are saying for all ovarian tumors.
So that's what carcinomas.
Ma'am,
Everything is
carcinomas only, ma'am,
carcinoma.
because I mentioned about recurrences, liver recurrences, oligometastasis only, ma'am. So I mentioned about carcinomas.
No, your conclusion was carcinoma. That is why.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah, no more questions from my side.
Let's find out what is carcinoma.
Okay, ma'am.
Amrita, any questions?
No, I have no.
No
So
questions.
I think Dr. Chandni, is she? Are
Yeah,
you waiting?
she's there. She's there, I think.
Okay.
Sajita,
Hello,
can
madam.
You stop? Sajita, can you stop your slide sharing?
Yeah.
Yes,
Hello, madam.
Yes,
Yes,
you're
Can you
Chandni.
hear me now?
Yes,
Yes,
definitely.
Chandni,
We
you
can
can
hear you
start.
well.
Okay, ma'am. Sorry for my delay.
No problem.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Let me start my presentation. It's an atypical presentation of a granulosa cell tumor as Meigs syndrome. And coming to the introduction, it comprises around 2 to 5% of all ovarian carcinomas. It is the most common type of sex-cord stromal tumor, and pathogenesis is differentiation towards the follicular granulosa cell tumor. And the exact cell of origin is disputed, with the granulosa cell, theca cell, or fibroblasts having been proposed as putative progenitors. The majority are adult cell type, around 95%, and minority under juvenile, around 5%. And I am presenting a case report of a 49-year-old para for life for menstrual bleeding of 1 year duration with abdominal distension, dyspnea, loss of weight of 1 month duration. There is no relevant past medical, surgical, or family history, and on examination, the patient was emaciated and pallor present. There is no palpable lymph node, and in perabdomen, abdomen distended with a palpable mass of 20 to 18 centimeter, variable in consistency with gross ascites. In perspeculum, there is cystocele present with cervix pulled up, and in pervaginal examination, the exact size of the uterus cannot be assessed, and the mass can be palpable through the fornix. And it is initially evaluated elsewhere with routine investigations, USG, CECT, and the multiple FNAC true-cut biopsy taken in suspicion of a disseminated ovarian neoplasm due to the ascites, which were all inconclusive. The investigations are within normal limit except for anemia and hypoalbuminemia, and the tumor markers CA125 CEA within normal limit. And the USG showing an abdominopelvic solid cystic lesion around 20 centimeter with gross ascites, and the CECT showing the abdominopelvic lesion converging to left adnexa with solid areas. They common possibility of an ovarian neoplasm. The patient re-evaluated in our hospital with serum inhibin B showing a elevated levels of 1390 nanogram per ml, and MRI showing a solid cystic pelvic mass around 16 centimeter with no enlarged lymph nodes. Omentum seems to be normal with gross ascites and minimal pleural effusion, and uterus is normal size with endometrial thickness of 8 millimeter. This is the MRI showing the solid cystic tumor abutting the uterus as well as the bowel tubes. We proceeded with endometrial study showing simple hyperplasia, and the patient underwent open biopsy in view of multiple inconclusive FNAC. The HPR showed was a fibrothecoma with sheets of spindle cells with bland ovoid nucleus and scant cytoplasm. So we proceeded with staging laparotomy with a provisional diagnosis of Meigs syndrome. But the intraoperatively around 6 liters of ascitic fluid is drained, and the right ovary was enlarged to a solid cystic mass of 30 to 20 centimeter. This is the gross specimen showing the solid and cystic component with areas of necrosis, and the post-operative HPR came as granulosa cell tumor with R0 resection. This is the HPR image, lobules of tumor cells with round nuclei, that is the coffee, and a trabecular pattern and nest of cells round nuclei bodies. and she was given postoperative chemotherapy with paclitaxel and carboplatin regime for 6 cycles to reduce the recurrence in view of large tumor. Moving on to the discussion part, these granulosa cell tumors are low-grade indolent malignant neoplasm originating from the granulosa cells of ovarian follicles. They are mainly the estrogen-secreting tumors. The adult granulosa cell tumors are associated with ascites in 10% cases, and the fluid accumulation may be due to the vasoactive substance release due to VEGF and increases the vascular permeability. The age should be in a wide range and most commonly in around 50 to 55 years, and mostly presented as symptoms due to adnexal mass or endocrine manifestations. Around 10% present with ovarian torsion, rupture, and hemoperitoneum, and mostly associated with hyperestrogenism, hyperplasia, carcinoma in adults, and if in children, it is present as precocious puberty due to high estrogen conditions. And the prognostic factors, the stage of the tumor, the large size, advanced stage, high mitotic index, residual disease, bilaterality are poor prognostic factors. And the complete tumor resection is the primary treatment modality, and the stage 2 to 4 need postoperative chemotherapy with BEP regimen as per NCCN guidelines. Mostly the DDs are fibroma and PCOMA. And leading to my conclusion, usually the Meigs syndrome presented with a triad of ovarian fibroma with ascites and pleural effusion. Even though there's a rare association is shown between the Meigs syndrome and granulosa cell tumor. And these are my references, and thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Chandni.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, Chandni, why did you do an inhibin B upfront? I mean, initially itself you did inhibin B. Did you suspect a granulosa cell tumor?
No, ma'am. We are suspecting a fibroma because due to the FNAC report, but it is coming as a fibroma or any other germ cell tumor. And to screen for other tumors, we are proceeded with an inhibin B. And due to patient presented with heavy menstrual bleeding, and in this age group, heavy menstrual bleeding caused by a hyperestrogenic stage, mostly we suspect an estrogen tumors. That's why, ma'am.
Yeah, no more questions from my side.
Dr. Chandni.
Okay, ma'am.
Are you aware of any criteria for selecting patients for adjuvant chemotherapy in granulosa cell tumors?
Usually adjuvant chemotherapy is taken for stage 2 to 4. The staging for epithelial cancers and sex cord stromal tumors are same, and usually stage 2 to 3 are receiving a chemotherapy, ma'am, adjuvant chemotherapy of BEP regime or paclitaxel carboplatin regime according to recent NCCN guidelines. And we can given it for a high risk stage 1 tumors also. In this case, like it's a more than 15 centimeter tumor, so we can anticipate a recurrence, so we can proceed with an adjuvant chemotherapy.
Yes, and you also mentioned the mitotic index.
Yeah, we have a mitotic index of 2 mitotic figures per 10 high power field, but usually we prefer if it is more than 4 mitotic figures in 10 high power field.
Okay.
Dr. Chandni, do you give chemo for adjuvant chemo for all stage 2 cases of granulosa cell tumor, or are there any situations where you can probably avoid the chemo in stage 2?
Ma'am, we can avoid, having a routine follow-up, but usually we preferring all stage 2 to 4 disease with bad prognostic factors. These bad prognostic factors with high mitotic index, large tumor size, bilaterality, and if it is present, then we can.
So for all R0 cases, would you give chemo? Is there any cases where you can avoid a chemo for R0 cases?
Okay, if it is small size tumors, we can avoid, ma'am. The patient is able for routine follow-up with inhibin levels and CT, and then we can avoid, ma'am.
Yeah, it can be controversial because of the limited number of cases to show your forward management. Yeah, okay, fine. Poma?
Yeah, I have no questions. Thank you. So if we are done, can we wind up the session then? Amrita and Michelle.
Yeah, yes, I think we are running, we have overshot the time a lot.
So thank you, organizers. Thank you, participants. All of you presented very well.